The Senate, I don't think there's any mystery about what is included in here. This package of amendments, which has now been incorporated into a floor substitute, was shared with everyone, seems to me like a week and a half ago, something like that. And there's been, I think, during this process, I would agree with one of the comments that our distinguished floor leader may share with you later. It's been a convoluted process for sure, but we get to this point sometimes when we have these impasses and disagreements over where we want to go. And I'm no stranger to this issue, Mr. President. I've been involved. I was here in 2014 as we struggled with this, not in May as we're doing now, which I consider timely, a little late but timely. We were struggling at the end as we neared the end of June on this very topic. But a lot has changed, Mr. President, over that period of time. The dynamic here in the General Assembly has changed. And we find ourselves in a moment now where we have, and I would move the adoption now of this, Mr. President, but would like to speak further to that motion.
Senator has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a bill that has been fashioned by consensus with other members of this body, the body at the other end of the hall, and some input from the administration in terms of where we needed to go and felt it appropriate to go with a budget that would serve our constituencies throughout the Commonwealth, that needed to be done in a hurry because it's time to get a budget. So we're there now, and we've had adequate opportunity, I think, for people to understand the contents. We've had this prepared, and there's adequate opportunity of members, if we want to continue the debate, to make their points with proposed floor amendments, and we certainly will address those. I would share, Mr. President, the process did break down, and there were a number of reasons for that. But typically, what happens at the end of a session when we get to this point where we lay a big proposal on the table, it comes out of a conference committee. And that conference committee has met and diligently, because we do work diligently here. We have a good process in Virginia. It is bipartisan. It works well for us in the past and has worked well for us now. But we had a breakdown because of this same subject, Medicaid expansion, and the extreme intense feelings on both sides of the issue that many people have. So we had a breakdown. But I will share with you, Mr. President, that this particular package that is being presented today as a floor substitute is a consensus document that if we were to have run it through our conference committee, you'll find that all 6 members of the House of Delegates that were on the conference committee approve and would sign off on a report right now for this package of amendments. I would further suggest to you, Mr. President, that we have 7 members of our original conference committee that were appointed, and of those 7, 4 of those members would sign off if we were coming out of conference on this package that is now in front of you as a floor substitute. So while the process has been a bit different, a bit convoluted, as some might suggest, we have embraced our philosophy in the past of working things out, coming to agreements, and this is what this particular bill represents. Now, in making those agreements, it's a majority agreement. It's not, obviously, it reflects provisions for Medicaid expansion in a manner that a number of this body and a number at the other end of the General Assembly building here will disapprove of, because they think it's wrong to do this. But however, we're at a point now where we've got to fish or cut bait, and we have a budget now that I think will serve our constituencies well, and I offer that to you, Mr. President.
I thank the senator. Do any other senators wish to be heard on the motion? What purpose, Senator from James City County, Senator Norman Rise.
Mr. President, if the gentleman from Augusta would yield for a couple of questions that are very similar to ones I'd asked earlier.
Will the senator yield?
Mr. President, I'd be pleased to yield.
You have the floor.
Mr. President, my first question is, are there any provisions contained in this floor substitute of 5002 that were not contained either in the original House budget bill or the original Senate budget bill?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would respond to the senator from James City County by saying yes.
Further question?
Mr. President, then my question would be, then what?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, if the gentleman and the Senate will bear with me, I will try because there are a number. First,
Mr. President, I'll make it easier. Give me your top three.
okay. First, we have provisions for the Joint Subcommittee on Health and Human Resources oversight to follow up on a number of initiatives that are of concern to all the members in terms of making this proposal work, in terms of addressing some of the issues that some of the members wanted in terms of other options for insurance, and in terms of addressing the studies and findings and recommendations we might have on altering our certificate of public need. That is one. Another one, we created a JLARC. We are proposing to create a special unit of the JLARC Health and Human for Health and Human Resources oversight, which is something that a number of my colleagues, I think from both sides of the aisle, have been concerned about with the costs associated with our healthcare delivery system and with the potential for mistakes, for potential for fraud and abuse, for potential for policies to be in place which are not well-founded, that we wanted to establish this unit. This unit will cost over the biennium over $1 million, Mr. President, but that we felt that was important. The district courts. The other provisions that I'm seeing here were either in the House or Senate to some extent. I could pick out, Mr. President, just in further clarification from the senator from James City County, did you want ones that weren't in the Senate or ones that weren't in the Senate or the House version?
Senator's floor.
Mr. President, I would say to the gentleman I'm appreciative of the answer that he's given me so far, and I'll try to be a little more direct. Mr. President, my next question was, under the Senate proposed budget, there was an initiative that was undertaken in an accumulated budget language that would have gotten the Senate to the position where we would have 2 full-time aides because we are 2.5 times the population of the members of the House. What happened to that money?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, in the informal conference that we had, those provisions were omitted. They were, I think, referred to by some as the blob, where we had clearly not vetted them. There were provisions for additional aides. There were provisions for an additional payment for senators if you attended more than one meeting in a day. Initially, as we negotiated with the House, they accepted the additional payment if you attended more than one meeting in a day, and then it was consensus that it would not be included because most of the members, not on the Finance Committee, were unaware of it. The public was not aware of it, and so we felt that it had not been vetted appropriately, even though I thought it would have been good policy, and we did not include it.
So, Mr. President, my question would be, you as the chief, if not the lone negotiator on behalf of the Senate, abdicated on the responsibility of the senators getting a second aide.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I will accept that responsibility. That yes, I
admire that.
I abdicated.
Thank you, Senator. Further question?
Mr. President, I would further say you made reference that it had not been fully vetted. As I looked at 5002, which we received the formal version of about 4 o'clock yesterday, are you confident that all 575 pages have been fully vetted by every member of this body, but more importantly, the general public?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, I would say that probably 95% of what is included in this floor substitute has been displayed and discussed, available to the general public from back in January and February. We're talking about probably 5% that we've opened up with amendments. Of those amendments, they have been circulated with all the members. They have been posted publicly. They have been vetted by our Senate Finance staff after they were created, and they found a number of errors and omissions, about one page of things that we would typically basically take care of in the enrollment process. Further, the Department of Planning and Budget has been involved in vetting it, and with the exception of the couple of items that you were asking about earlier, they've been out in the public domain for quite some time.
Mr. President, a little more pointed question. Was there any additional finances that were inserted in there for payment to a private college or university, specifically Hampton University?
Senator has the floor.
Yes, Mr. President. I think I would call the members' attention to a specific amendment that has been for their cancer treatment program at Hampton University, and that is there in the amount of $2 million.
Further
Mr.
question?
President, further inquiry, why are we giving a private college $2.2 million when we're not appropriately funding our public colleges and universities?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, and this is a bit difficult to answer, but I would say that sometimes we have public-private partnerships, and in this instance, we had information basically in helping this program along. It was going to cultivate a very good return on our investments, so we basically opted for the public-private partnership.
Senator.
Mr. President, years ago with the Honorable Emily Kirk, she taught me a word that was otherwise not in my active vocabulary, and that was obfuscation. And Mr. President, I would say I just found that answer obfuscated. More pointedly, is that $2.2 million to Hampton University, which is a historical black college, when we're not appropriately funding our public colleges and universities, have anything to do with a prospective transportation initiative?
Mr. President, to be quite candid, I would say yes.
And, Mr. President, I would further ask that as a result of that potential financial inducement, has there been any formal written agreement between Hampton University and the Department of Transportation or the Secretary of Finance?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would respond to the senator by saying, not to my knowledge, but that there have been assurances that this would result in a cooperative relationship that would be very beneficial, as well as enhancing the ability of the private entity to conduct their work.
Mr. President, so just so I'm clear, we're going to give a private college $2.2 million on a promise that has not been memorialized. Is that correct?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, there has been no formal agreement, but we are, yes, we have funded that private college on numerous occasions in the past, and this is a continuation of that.
Senator.
And Mr. President, would yield further questions to the senator from Virginia Beach.
Mr. President, I would say, so we have a history of funding Hampton University out of public dollars?
Mr. President, I'm
Yield for a question. Is there anything further?
I'm not. I believe in the past that we have provided some funding towards the proton therapy unit at Hampton University. I believe it's been in several of the past budgets, and I believe, and I'm drawing, don't hold me to this, it was
Well, Mr. President,
Maybe, perhaps not, if I may finish, perhaps not a written agreement, but an understanding between Hampton University and previous governors regarding that. Having said that, it's my understanding also that through actions of the Commonwealth Transportation Board that VDOT cannot directly talk with or negotiate with the Hampton University on a project that is critical to the Hampton Roads area.
Thank you, Senator.
I would ask the gentleman from Virginia Beach if he knows, and I mean this respectfully, it may be beyond his scope of knowledge. Is not, in fact, that proton beam facility bonded indebtedness?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, if I could respond, I'm not aware of what the status of the financial status of the bonding with that particular unit, nor am I aware of any of the financial arrangements there.
Mr. President, I would ask the gentleman another question then.
Will the senator yield? Will the senator yield?
Oh,
for
I
a question?
apologize.
Yeah, I yield.
Senator has the floor.
I would ask the gentleman that can you please tell me with specificity what that $2.2 million is going to be spent for in that private university?
Senator has the floor.
It's my understanding that that money will be used to help offset some of the operational and perhaps capital costs of that particular unit, the proton therapy unit that we referred to.
Mr. President, I would further ask the question, isn't in fact this money being used in an inducement incentivization for hoping that Hampton University will make available a piece of property, but it has not been formalized in any written agreement, and we're doing this on a wing and a prayer?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would note that it's probably a split appropriation over the course of 2 years. It'll be subject to review again when we go into session, just 7 months from now, unfortunately not 10 months from now, but 7 months from now. And we'll have a lot more clarification and specification on how this particular endeavor is going. But I can tell you that working with Hampton University will result in a tremendously large savings to the taxpayers of Virginia if we are successfully able to negotiate on the particular piece of property that the gentleman refers to.
Senator.
Mr. President, then I would ask the following question. If, in fact, there has been no formal contractual understanding reached, why would we not wait on a prudent business decision to provide money until after the contract or a written agreement is memorialized rather than doing it on a wing and a prayer and a promise?
Senator has the floor.
Well, I would respond to the gentleman that I don't really consider it a wing and a prayer. I feel confident that the sides can come together and negotiate on this, and the implications of not having this piece of property, quite frankly, run into the multiple, really approaching $100 million, but more importantly, not having access to this property would cause significant traffic delays throughout Hampton Roads for the period of time that this project is under construction. And we're referring to the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel project, and I'm talking about delays of the magnitude of such that it couldn't impact the entire economy of Hampton Roads, particularly Southside Hampton Roads, without having access to this particular piece of property.
Mr. President, I would ask another question of the gentleman. Does the $2.2 million going to Hampton University in any way apply to a potential purchase of real estate that might be involved in a transportation project?
Senator has the floor.
I would reply to the gentleman, it's not my understanding that the money's not going to be applied to any particular purchase. I think the details of the agreement really haven't been worked out to this point. It's a hope that we can continue some discussions with Hampton University and bring this in. But I can tell you that there is amongst those at Hampton University some feelings like previous General Assemblies have let them down on what they considered an obligation to the university. And that may have something to do with some of their reactions to point to date on this. And so I think that while we're under no contractual obligation to fulfill obligations made by a previous administration, it certainly I believe that this will go a long ways, and it's a relatively minor investment for a tremendous payoff for the Hampton Roads region.
Senator, is there a further question?
Yes, sir, Mr. President, if you will. Just so I'm clear, so the money that is being appropriated goes to the Hampton University proton beam facility. Is that correct, sir?
That is correct, yes.
Okay. Next question, Mr. President.
I'll yield.
All right, Senator, has the floor.
Thank you, sir. And so none of that money is going towards a potential land acquisition. Is that correct?
Senator, has the floor.
That's my understanding, and I will yield again.
And Mr. President, I would say so. This money is being provided for incentivization for us to come back and make an additional appropriation for the purchase of real estate that may impact the Hampton Roads transportation project.
And
Floor.
Mr. President, I will respond that this General Assembly will not have to directly appropriate money for that the bulk of this money will come from proceeds from the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission and bond proceeds from that revenue stream that will pay ultimately for the project, and ultimately some tolls on the back end will assist and pay. There may well be, under HB2 scaling, a state appropriation. To date, there has not been any and has not been recognized. So our projections, financial projections, show us basically accommodating that entire cost for that particular project, which is currently close to having solicitations go out.
Further question?
Mr. President, perhaps my final question. A word that is bannered around in the General Assembly, which sends chills up and down my spine on occasions, is the word transparency. And my question is this: had I not asked these series of questions, were either you or the senator from Augusta going to reveal to this body that this $2.2 million was being paid to a private college to incentivize them to cooperate on the sale and purchase of a piece of land?
Senator has the floor.
I would respond to the gentleman that as we go through a budget, as we've gone before, if there's any questions on any particular line items, that certainly would respond with the full response on this. There was certainly no means to provide any type of trickery or lack of transparency. I will say to the gentleman that you're obviously aware of the project based on the line of questioning, and I can assure you that we are looking in the realm of significantly approaching $100 million in additional costs on this project for lack of acquisition to this particular piece of property. And really, we have appropriated dollars for the proton therapy unit in the past. My understanding is that there was an obligation made, as I mentioned earlier, with that. This is a means to represent and fill that and hopefully bring it to bear. But I will also say that the Department of Transportation has been operating with one hand tied behind their back when the CTB tells them they cannot directly negotiate with Hampton University, which has forced some of us into somewhat of an awkward position, finding ourselves doing a job that was not really entailed as part of the Senate to try to open up negotiations and build a bridge, no pun intended, to build a bridge between our Virginia state government and this private university for the added impact of achieving a project that I think we all recognize is absolutely vital to the region of Hampton Roads and, quite frankly, to the economy of Virginia, and that would be expanding the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel to do that. This particular land acquisition and those obligations that governors have made in the past and appropriations we have been paid in the past, if that helps throw oil on the water so that we can move forward with the rest of the negotiations and see this project come to fruition, then I think it's well worth it. And I think it's an investment that will pay dividends, not just for those of us here in the Hampton Roads area, but indeed the entire Commonwealth of Virginia.
My last question, which either to the senator from Virginia Beach.
I will happily yield to the last final question.
Or the senator from Augusta.
Final question.
Are there any other sneaky little amendments that have been slid in there that would provide inducement or incentivization for other individuals? No.
I will yield to the senator from Augusta on that particular question. But off the top of my head, I can't think of any.
Senator from Augusta, Senator Hanger.
Oh, okay. No, I'm not in charge of sneaky amendments, Mr. President.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is Senator from Rockingham, Senator Obenshain, rise?
Mr. President, I rise to speak to the motion.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, members of the Senate, a couple of things, just a couple of observations. First of all, that last line of questioning recalls to me one of my favorite and most memorable moments on the floor of the Senate. It also came during a debate about the adoption of a budget. I remember a number of years ago when we were talking about non-governmental agency appropriations, and the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee stood, I think, right where the senator from Virginia Beach is standing, answering questions about the budget, and was asked about the non-governmental agency appropriations. And he answered it and said these appropriations were carefully considered by the subcommittee on non-governmental agency appropriations. The next question was, who exactly serves on that subcommittee for non-governmental agency appropriations? He says, well, I think there are a handful. And the follow-up question was, can you name them? And it wound up being a subcommittee of one. And, you know, this whole process has a lot of similarities to that budget of the past. I notice that the chamber is a lot less crowded than it usually is when we are talking about a budget. Usually there are chairs right behind me, right behind the senator from Augusta. Usually we have the aid and assistance of our Senate Finance Committee staff. They're not here. You know why they're not here? Because they were cut out of the process. They were not involved in the process. We don't have the ability to tap their expertise, and I think that's a crying shame. This budget substitute embodies all the worst that we expect usually to see out of Washington, D.C. We are literally spraying money around to every corner of the Commonwealth without considering whether it is a prudent expenditure of the monies that have been afforded to us by the taxpayers who we have a duty to be good stewards for. It sounds like earmarks, pet projects, and a lack of transparency, and I think that that's incredibly unfortunate. This budget really represents and I hesitate to say it because I'm a relatively new member of the Senate Finance Committee, but it really represents a near total abdication of the Senate's ability to have a role in writing a budget. I have heard a little bit during the course of these last couple of weeks that during the course of this process, that this budget that has come out and is represented by this substitute is somehow more conservative as a result of the work that has been done over the course of the last couple of weeks. What I see in this budget is that what we saw a couple of months ago was a bill that came out from down the hall with a bed tax of $306 million. This bill has a bed tax of $590 million. Now, I was born at night, but not last night, and that ain't a more conservative budget. It is not a substitute that warrants our support. It is a huge transfer of enormous funds, not just once, but on an ongoing basis to hospitals in Virginia, year after year. And the senator from Rockbridge and I had a robust debate in Augusta County about annual transfers to private entities earlier in session. This is a transfer to private entities on steroids compared to the one that we talked about earlier. And, I don't want to say too much about the folks wandering the halls of the Capitol today, but there are an awful lot of suits around the halls that don't belong to one body or the other. And I respectfully submit that that happens when there's more than $1 billion that's about to get sprayed around. This, ladies and gentlemen, members of the Senate, absolutely is not a more conservative budget. It is not a conservative budget. It is one of the most liberal budgets I have seen in my time in the General Assembly. And I would urge the members, if you feel the same way, if you do not embrace this kind of government growth, you must vote against adoption of this floor substitute.
Thank the Senator. For what purpose is Senator from Franklin County? Senator Stanley rise.
Thank you, Mr. President. Speak to the floor substitute.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I must associate my remarks with those of the senator from Harrisonburg. I mean, when you look at this budget, it is a ticking time bomb. Think about what he just said. $600 million in new taxes. $600 million in new taxes. That's the largest expansion of government, not just Medicaid we're talking about here, but the largest expansion of government in the history of the Commonwealth of Virginia. And let's be honest, like I told you a week ago, you know what this is? It's closing the old hospital gap. This is a $1.2 billion bailout to our hospitals. You know, I've been sitting here, and when you all stood in your points of personal privilege and you said, people are dying. If we don't do this, people are dying. They're not dying. Most of the people on this expansion, if you look at the numbers, are working, unmarried males. We're not dying. It's a false narrative. This is a bailout to a hospital program that had a promise from Obamacare that would have $750 billion in its pocket. Taken away and replaced with over $1 trillion in new spending in expansion of Medicaid. Didn't happen, didn't occur, and now you're footing the bill, Virginia. You're footing the bill with $600 million in new taxes. You're footing the bill from taking expansion money from a federal government that cannot sustain itself at $22 trillion in debt and growing. We are a 50-50 shared program of Medicaid. This money will not last forever. And to associate with the senator from Harrisonburg, what he said is, well, then are we fiscally responsible with it? No. We spent it like we're drunk in New Orleans. And yet we built into this reoccurring cost that we have not contemplated that when this one-time money runs out, how are we going to pay for it? Let alone how we're going to pay for Medicaid expansion when those extra costs come in, when those extra enrollees go up and increase and put pressure on our budget. How are we going to pay for it? Is it built in here? Have we made concessions, plans? No. In fact, what we did is we fooled Virginia by saying, don't worry, it's a conservative plan. Everybody's working. Oh, and we've got a kill switch. We've got this kill switch that will kill Medicaid expansion if the federal money runs out or if they pull it back to 50-50. Which, ladies and gentlemen, is a falsehood, a political falsehood created not by our friends in the House, but if you think back, was created by our former governor, Governor McAuliffe. He was the one that put it up every time. When we rejected it, he put it in there. But we'll have a kill switch in case something happens in the government, in the federal side, which will stop this money.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
I will yield as soon as I am finished graciously to my friend from the senior senator from Fairfax. But let me tell you, this kill switch, as an attorney, I will retire when we try to flick that kill switch. And I will represent every Medicaid expanded recipient who then sues us, because once you give an entitlement, you have a process by which that entitlement is taken away, protected by the Administrative Procedures Act. You can't just yank somebody out of an entitlement that you grant them. Once you ring this bell, you cannot unring this bell. Because then the lawsuits and the delays and the overruns, and while these people are appealing, being taken off of the Medicaid rolls, occurs, that'll be months and months and cost to this state even greater than we've contemplated. This kill switch is no switch at all. There's no power to it. And quite frankly, I think no one in this body has the political courage to take away an entitlement once it's granted. You heard, our governor told me when we started this process in January, we got to do something for our hospitals. We got to do something for my hospitals. And that's what this is. A $1.2 billion bailout to cover the hospitals that quite frankly made a bad deal. And I told you about that before, and I'll tell you about you again. They made a bad deal. And you know when you make a bad deal? At least in our business, you got to eat the bad deal. Not here. They just turn to this body and say, help us out. We made a bad deal. We didn't contemplate what the Supreme Court would do to us. Help us out of this bad deal. Grab some taxpayer money. Fund all our businesses. And what we'll do is we'll put ads on in the newspaper, and we'll put ads on the radio that complain about these cantankerous Republicans. How dare they use arcane rules and try to hold up this budget that hurt teachers and police officers and threaten local budgets, when that is nothing but cover for a bailout. It's plain and it's true. Ask them. They can't say no. They know what this is, and you can say people are dying all the time, but it's not. It's to close the hospital gap in anticipated revenues from Medicare, the money you paid in that is now going to an insurance company. Let's not do that with this bill. Thank you, and I will yield, Mr. President, if you still wants to ask me a question, but hopefully I answered it for him.
Senior Senator from Fairfax, Senator Saslaw, rise.
I would ask that the congressman from Franklin yield for question.
Senator Yields, you have the floor.
I will yield.
Just a short time earlier, we heard that apparently, listening to the debate, that very few people on Medicaid expansion are working. And now you're just telling us that who's out there, who's going to be on Medicaid expansion. You said hardworking single people. Y'all need to make up your mind one way or another. Are they working or are they not working? That's one thing. Biggest tax increase ever. I'm quite sure that if you go back to 1986 and that transportation package and adjust it for inflation, this thing is a drop in the bucket. I can tell you there has never been any tax, ever appear on the floor of the Senate or in the House when I was in it that wasn't, quote, the biggest tax increase in the history of the Commonwealth. Okay? Let me tell you something. This is you, as the senator knows, this is a drop in the bucket. I mean, compared to what we've done here, and everybody knows it. And as far as bailing out, 1 minute we're taxing the hospitals, the next minute he says we're bailing them out. Speaking of bailouts, how's that thing doing down in Patrick County? I'd ask the senator.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I think there's a question in there. And let me try to dissect the few that I think are there. When I said, if you look at the statistics, the majority of people that will at least qualify under the 100 to 138, remember that's 100% above the poverty level to 138. So that's an income level that's above the poverty level, usually above the welfare level. And they've said that the majority of those people that would receive. I don't think anybody said everybody's not working, but the majority are what we qualify as unmarried working males. Able-bodied. Maybe I used working in it. It's able-bodied, unmarried males. Now, let me answer your question about Patrick County. See, Patrick County had only 5% uncompensated care. Most of it was Medicare because our population is aging. And so right now that county is trying to work through Virginia Community Capital, which has over $5 million on a note on that property that it loaned the previous operator, that company from Louisiana. So we've got two companies willing to come in there, and the stopgap is it not profitable? The problem, the issue for the citizens of Patrick County and their government is how do we take care of that debt? Because Virginia Community Capital gained it from investors that if they default on that, then the clawback provisions are enacted on a tax credit that those that donated the money to VCC then have to pay back. So the risk to VCC right now is that they'll default on the loan and be on the hook for about $3 million or maybe even more in tax credits that they gave at the time. That's the only impediment.
So, Mr. President, what he's saying is there's good bailouts and there's bad bailouts.
Mr. President, that has nothing to do with a bailout. That hospital was profitable. The company went bankrupt. Now
the hospital was profitable. The country.
Mr. President, I appreciate the enthusiasm, but the running debate and the questions should go through Mr. President.
The senior senator from Fairfax has the floor.
I'd yield to the expert on decorum, Mr. K.A. Anyhow, Mr. President, I thank the congressman from Franklin County.
Thank you, Senator. For what purpose is the senator from Southern Fairfax, Senator Barker, rise?
Mr. President, to speak to the measure that's before us right now.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I want to address three different issues that have been talked about already here today. One is the proton beam therapy program that operates at Hampton University. That is something that was developed in a private setting at a private facility in the Hampton area with private monies. There's significant research that is done at that particular facility. It was one of the very first proton beam therapy treatment programs and research programs that set up in the entire country. There are only a handful of them around the U.S. right now. It is the only one in Virginia that has that particular service. There is one coming into the Washington, D.C. area right now in D.C., but none other in Virginia. What is proposed in this particular budget, and as the senior senator from Virginia Beach said on numerous occasions, we have funded this for a number of years. So we have provided support in the research and the provision of services at the proton beam site in Hampton. What is proposed here is $2.2 million, but only $200,000 of that, $100,000 in the first year of the biennium and another $100,000 in the second year of the biennium goes towards operations and providing of the services. $2 million out of this is done specifically into a foundation that is supporting research opportunities. This provides monies that can be used in terms of providing matching funds that can be used in bringing additional research grants from federal funds or other types of private funds, other private funds that are used and which are extraordinarily beneficial to the people of Virginia, but also in terms of the research that's done here. We in Virginia do not have the level of funding for research and development that I think we should have, something that certainly we could have, something that we could have, particularly given our outstanding higher education institutions here that train and help get a lot of the researchers their PhDs in the STEM fields, that type of thing. Many of them leave Virginia after they get their PhDs, after we spent money on them, because we don't have the research opportunities here. This is something that is being done that is providing research done specifically in Virginia and is providing extraordinary benefits with it. Second issue I want to address is the issue of $600 million in taxes. What I think was missed in the presentation of that is that there is no general fund tax increase here. What there is the provider assessment, which is levied solely on hospitals in Virginia, and that is the source. So it is not as if we are rating the individual taxpayers across Virginia to generate this fund. The hospitals have done an extraordinary service to Virginia and to Virginians by agreeing to these types of assessments. One is to provide the funding for the state share of Medicaid expansion, and that includes the share related to the administration of the program, such as for the work requirement, which was discussed earlier, the $25 million over 2 years. They are providing that so that these are the funds that are used in lieu of state funds, state general fund dollars that otherwise would be required to draw down federal monies and to be able to provide services to people throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia. So there is no general fund tax increase here that would have negative impacts upon individual taxpayers across Virginia. And finally, the third issue I want to address is the issue of appeals. The senator from Franklin had better not count on getting rich on the appeals that might be generated following a trigger switch, the kill switch that would be in this provision for our program, and which is in many other states. In Virginia, we already have in regulations that there are not individual appeal rights when someone is being removed from a Medicaid role or any other role in terms of public assistance of one form or another, when it is done because of the termination of a program, and all the people in that program are similarly affected. So there is no appeal right on an individual basis. And this also has been confirmed through the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services at the federal level. They support and authorize those types of things as well. So there are no individual appeal rights that would cause problems with administration of the kill switch that's in here. There is no general fund tax increase on individuals or corporations or anybody else throughout Virginia other than what the hospitals themselves are voluntarily contributing. And the proton therapy that is done is the vast majority of that is the $2 million that is set to a foundation to promote the research and to try to bring additional monies into Virginia. Thank you very much.
Mr. President.
Thanks, Senator.
Mr. President.
First Senator from Hanover, Senator McDougal.
Would the gentleman yield for a question?
Will Senator yield?
Certainly, I'd be happy to yield.
You have the floor.
Mr. President, I asked the gentleman, if I'm looking at the recitation that we received yesterday of the amount from the hospital provider assessment, there's approximately $263 million in fiscal year 2019 and approximately $617 million in fiscal year 2020. Is that accurate?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. Chair, I think the figure is, what I have here is what was provided to us, I think is $190 million in the first year that is provided for both for each of the two segments of the provider assessment and $402.9 million the second year. So it adds up to about $600 million over the 2 years.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, will the gentleman yield for a further question?
Yes, I'd be happy to yield.
Yield, you have the floor.
Mr. President, the numbers I just recited, would those be the net revenue impact to private acute hospitals in Virginia after you included the provider assessment and the Medicaid rate enhancement?
Senator has the floor.
The figures that I cited here are, and I'm not sure whether they're exactly the same as what you're talking about. The figures that I cited here are the figures that are provided of the assessment that would be generated, referencing basically what was referred to previously as the tax, which would generate close to $600 million over the 2 years, and that would be coming from the hospitals throughout Virginia.
Further question?
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for additional question?
Certainly, I'd be happy to yield.
Mr. President, my question is, does the gentleman not agree that the net amount to the hospitals after the assessment, that the revenue would be for coverage expansion to private acute hospitals and Medicaid rate enhancement would be those numbers of $263 million and $617 million approximately in the next 2 fiscal years?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I don't have those specific numbers right in front of me right now, but I don't necessarily disagree. There are benefits to the hospitals. The hospitals clearly have proposed stepping forward in a way that they would provide the state share of funding for Medicaid expansion. And in funding that portion of it, they actually get very little benefit, but they get some benefit out of that process, but they do receive a much larger benefit as a result of the rate payment there. The rate payment right now, years ago, there were a number of commitments made to the hospitals by the General Assembly and by the administrations and others that we would try to raise the rate paid to the hospitals so that they're not losing so much money on every Medicaid patient. Right now, the hospitals are paid between 70 and 71% of what their costs are. So every dollar that they spend on a Medicaid patient, they lose about 30 cents. What this would do is, with this rate enhancement, would get them up to 88% of costs, so they lose only about 12 cents on the dollar.
Mr. President, would the gentleman yield for additional question?
Further question?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Mr. President, would that additional revenue go only to private acute hospitals and none of the 3 public hospitals in Virginia, meaning teaching hospitals, meaning UVA, VCU, or Children's King's Daughter Hospital in Norfolk?
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I would say that those hospitals are not assessed for this under the provider assessment the way the others are. Right now, those 3 hospitals are already maxed out on the amount of Medicaid money that they can receive. Under federal rules, they cannot receive additional dollars. And in fact, if we, under our state Medicaid program, provide them an additional dollar, they have to return that same dollar in some other way. Right now, because of dish payments and other types of things, they are maxed out at the total level there.
Mr. President, I'd ask the gentleman an additional question.
Yield.
I'd be happy to yield. And
Where's the floor?
Mr. President, isn't it accurate that over the last number of years in budget reductions, we've actually taken them from that 100% down to like 96 or 97%, so they're not at 100% now and they could still receive additional revenues?
Senator's floor.
Mr. President, I would say that my understanding is that is not correct, that they are still fully at 100% right now. And in fact, just last year, when we initiated the program to provide funding through the Medicaid program in Virginia, for funding additional medical residency slots because we have so few that are offered in Virginia compared to the number of medical students that graduate from our colleges and universities getting medical degrees. What was discovered by DMAS in going through this was that if the institutions, if VCU, UVA, or Children's Hospitals of King's Daughters applied for and got funding from Medicaid for any additional residency slots, they would lose a comparable dollar somewhere else. So it would provide absolutely no benefit to them because they were maxed out. So that was just a year ago.
Mr. President, I'm going to speak to the motion.
Senator has the floor.
Mr. President, I think the Senator and I have received some different information in reference to whether our teaching hospitals could receive additional money. But I want to make the point very clear that the dollars in this substitute that's before us now do not go to our state hospitals, only go to private acute hospitals. So if you're looking at your teaching hospitals, Virginia Commonwealth University, right here in the capital, that does a tremendous amount of indigent care for many of the individuals who are in need. The University of Virginia, who does a tremendous amount of indigent care for those who live in the Valley and Central Virginia, and the Children's King's Daughters in Hampton Roads that does a tremendous amount of indigent care for individuals there. They do not receive any of this additional money. So these dollars are going to private entities, not to our state entities. Mr. President, for me personally, listening to the conversations about dollars going to other private universities in the Commonwealth of Virginia, when I know for fact that the institutions in Virginia, UVA and VCU in particular, have done a tremendous amount in their research. They have a tremendous amount of grant dollars that they are working on cancer research, brain research, neurological research, things that make a difference in people's lives. There are a lot of state institutions that we could take dollars to and help them be better. A lot here locally and a lot across the Commonwealth, and they don't all have to go to private institutions. So, Mr. President, as we have the conversation about where these dollars are going, I want to make sure that this body understands that they are not going to our state institutions that are doing tremendous work and making our Commonwealth better, that they are going to private institutions.
Thank the senator. For what purpose is the senior senator from Virginia Beach, Senator Wagner, rise?
Mr. President, speaking briefly to the amendments.
Senator has the floor.
Let me tell you, one of my daughters just recently became a nurse, and she's in the ICU down at a hospital in the Hampton Roads area. And I picked her up this weekend. We had a little chit-chat. She came over for Memorial Day and was kind of in tears. She had lost her first patient. And this patient had been in there several times before, in and out.